Today we're talking contract extensions for a couple different Packers who are entering the last year of their contract, specifically and mostly in the cases of AJ Dillon and Rashan Gary. Given cases for, against, what the market looks like. And I just got to say this before we start. AJ, Rashan, if you happen to see this video, please take no offense to the cases against. But if you happen to get a contract like the one that I'm projecting for you or what I'm saying the market is, feel free to reach out on Twitter. I take commissions in several different payment forms, and I'll be happy to give you my info. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Del Rey. Happy Friday to you if you happen to be catching this on the day it's going to go out. If not, I hope you're having a great weekend. But today for the Green Bay Packers, we are discussing players that are entering the last year of their contract, and then specifically looking at the cases of two of probably the two largest names of these players, and examining the case for, against, and what the comparables would be to give these players new contracts. We're talking contract extensions. We know historically the Packers like to welcome players back into town by announcing new money for one of their friends. We've seen it time and again. It was probably a little bit more of a staple during the Ted Thompson era than it has been under Brian Gutekunst, but nonetheless, it is part of the Packers' way of doing things. So there's two players I think of that may fall into the category of marquee named players that may be getting new contracts. Or of course, it could happen during the season, could be even the beginning of next offseason before these players could potentially hit free agency. So we're going to look at the cases of two players today. In addition to that, one slight request for you, especially if you're a regular around here. I've been talking lately about how we are in the dog days of summer. Yeah, the time of year when the content gets slower, where there's less to talk about. So this is my plea to you that if you have any ideas, any questions, anything that you'd like to see talked about on Lombardi Time Brews, just drop a comment down below. I know I've gotten some suggestions over the last week, especially I know Brandy gave a bunch of different topics and some others have too. So really, if you've got any ideas or things that you want to hear me talk about, especially between now and training camp beginning, just drop it in the comments and I'll see what I can do. Also, I'll announce it, but coming up soon, I do have some time off planned, some recharge the batteries, work on some side projects, and see what we can improve for the channel around here. So let's get into the topic of the day. Who are these Green Bay Packers that are entering their last year of their contract? Now, there are some that are only on one-year contracts. So I'm not talking about Keyshawn Nixon because he's only on a one-year deal, or Justin Hollins, Eric Wilson, several players who re-signed this offseason just for one-year contracts. I'm not talking about them because they would have just signed a multi-year contract. I'm talking about the guys who were in multi-year contracts, especially those guys who were drafted by the Packers that now contract is coming to an end. Those players are AJ Dillon, who has a cap number this year of $1.6 million. Josiah DeGuara, the tight end, a cap number of $1.3 million. Yosh Nijman, who's kind of a tweener because he was retained on a tender. He has a cap number of $4.3 million. John Runyon Jr., starting right guard, with a cap number of $2.7 million. Rashan Gary, $10.8 million is his cap number on his option this year. Jonathan Garvin, about a $1 million cap number. Darnell Savage, a cap number of $2.4 million on his option year, but 5.4 already got pushed into year 24. 1.3 got pushed into 2025, all because of void years being added. And then punter Pat O'Donnell, who's entering his second year, final year of this contract with a cap number of $2.3 million. An interesting note about Pat O'Donnell, I've seen other people kind of catch up on this a little bit. They have brought in a punter as competition, Dan Whalen, who frankly outperformed O'Donnell at mini camps in regards of hang time, distance. But we know one of the reasons why Pat O'Donnell was brought in last year in the first place was because Rich Bisaccia values his ability to hold so well. Supposedly, internally, the Packers consider O'Donnell one of the best holders in the league. So just because if you see numbers of Dan Whalen like out-punting Pat O'Donnell, and the Packers can save like $1.6 million by going from O'Donnell to Whalen, it's not necessarily guaranteed that O'Donnell's on his way out the door because there are other facets to his job. So, those are the players that are entering the last year of their contract, as well as their associating cap numbers. One thing that I do want to mention here, too, is I did not talk about guys that have historically been on the practice squad, getting into exclusive right free agent type deals and stuff like that. I kept it to players who are predominant contributors and came up with that list there. So, the two players that we're going to be talking about would be Quadzilla and Quadfather. I know it's only two legs, one human, AJ Dillon. And then also talking about Rashan Gary. Going to present a case for, a case against, and then what the comparables could be. Now looking specifically at AJ Dillon first. What is the case for keeping this running back? Because I know fans are very, very split. Especially casual fans of the team seem to adore AJ Dillon, right? He's the mayor of Door County. He's got the nicknames. He's got the Quadfather. He's got the Quadzilla. He collects cards, which I know has made him very popular in the memorabilia and card community. This is a guy who's adored by several different sects of the fan base. But then you also have those who dive into some of the advanced numbers or the raw data and say, well, AJ Dillon gets tripped up at the line too much. His tackles for loss in cold weather, etc., just isn't as good as you want it to be. And the thing is, I very much understand both sides. I think part of the case for retaining AJ Dillon is the fact that probably more than at least 99% of players who get drafted into Green Bay, he has embraced the Green Bay culture. Mayor of Door County, of course. But beyond that, you routinely see AJ Dillon, let's call him AJ Dillon the brand, going to high school football games in the fall on Friday nights. Or frequently tweeting out saying, hey, what high school events are going on? I got nothing to do tonight. He's become a fixture of the Green Bay community. And yes, in Green Bay, that still means something. Not only that, though, it's not just him pushing for it. The Green Bay Packers frequently ask him to be the face of several of their community endeavors. Just go back, go look at the Packers Twitter feed, their old Facebook page, whatever. And just scroll through to past charitable events. Who very often is handed a microphone? Who very often is the face of said events? It's AJ Dillon. And then, of course, one last, intangible type facet for AJ Dillon is the fact that he wants to stay in Green Bay. And he's been vocal about that. That doesn't exactly hurt his case. Why on the field would they want to keep AJ Dillon? Well, realistically, this is a guy who, over the last 2 years, of course, keep in mind, he's been a pro for 3 years. Year one was essentially lost to COVID and where he was on the depth chart as a rookie. But the last 2 years, he's been remarkably consistent, yards per carry over 4. He's been a better receiver than many people thought that he would be coming out of college. So you have a very good running back. I don't think anyone's going to confuse him with Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, the guys that are making $14, $16 million a year. But he is a very capable, good running back. He's had tremendous durability as well. Take out that COVID year in that first year, and this has been a very consistent, durable running back. He's in the top third in the entire NFL in efficiency metrics. Specifically, the graphic that I'm putting up right now, and what this does is it compares PFF grading with EPA, and you can see where he is in this graph. He's up there among some of the best names in the NFL, including his counterpart, Aaron Jones. As of recent too, PFF, if you follow PFF, they just named Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon the best running back tandem in the NFL. Then there's a case against AJ Dillon. There's also some question marks, which frankly, anytime you're in contract negotiations, question marks generally tend to fall on the negative side. And I guess the question here with AJ Dillon is, what is his ceiling? Like I said, no one is going to confuse him for Christian McCaffrey or, Alvin Kamara at his peak, because those are different types of running backs. But could he become Derrick Henry? Start handing the ball AJ Dillon 450 times a year and see if he can become Derrick Henry. Well, the answer is probably no. Derrick Henry is once in a generation type running back? And AJ Dillon hasn't shown, especially over the last 2 years, the ability to necessarily reach that level of superstardom, of elite play. Sure, he's very efficient. Sure, he's very good. But he's not elite, right? I feel like we can capably say that. I think you also have the knock of him being the lack of a complete back. Yes, he's been a better receiver than many people have thought, but again, it's not like he's pulling in 80 catches a year. Also, many people revere Aaron Jones as a superior receiver of the two. So on his own team, he's not exactly the receiving back. Pair that with his lack of breakaway speed, and you can't really argue that he's 100% a complete back. Looking more at those stats too. So then what is he? He's a power back, right? He's Jerome Bettis. He's the boss. He's a power back. Well, take a look at the numbers, right? Especially comparing him to his peers in both statistical output and what a likely contract looks like. And for some of them, last year at least, he had a third of the amount of broken tackles that they had. And that's not an indictment on AJ Dillon. He did end the year last year on a strong note with some really high quality play. But still, the problem remains that if just looking at the pure numbers of how often does he break tackles, it's not as high as you would expect someone with the reputation of being a pure power back is going to be. And that is a negative. And we know that these contract negotiations, maybe they're more ruthless in baseball, but we know from Andrew Brandt and others that these conversations generally make the team find all of the disses, all of the knocks on their own players. And of course, the agent on the other side finds all of the glowing statistics. Here for AJ Dillon, you have both. Efficiency is a great thing, but where's the power is a bad thing. So just keep all of that in mind. Now, for his comps, I did find 3 other players that I wanted to compare AJ Dillon to. These are players that I think are comparable in what a contract may look like. And again, understand that these are projections. I'm finding projections. I'm finding comparables. I don't know anything. I don't know as if the Packers and AJ Dillon have even remotely discussed what a contract would look like or not. But what are the comparables? What are the statistical commonalities that you see between Dillon and other running backs that may say, okay, his market value is approximately this? So I'm putting it up now. You can see I compared AJ Dillon to Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, and former Packer Jamal Williams. Now, keep in mind here that Sanders and Montgomery are 26. AJ Dillon is 25. Jamal Williams is 28. But let's take a look at some of these stats. I included both the basic stats, if you want to call them that, as well as some of the advanced metrics that help paint a picture of where exactly AJ Dillon is. Now, AJ Dillon has been remarkably consistent year over year. I did include just last year's stats for the purpose of this exercise. You can see attempts. Dillon falls to the bottom of the list, probably because he has Aaron Jones next to him. Yards, same thing. But so what really matters there is going to be yards per attempt, where Dillon has 4.1, tied for second on this list of these 4. Total touchdowns. Last year was ultimately kind of a disappointing year for touchdowns for AJ Dillon, and I've talked about that on this channel before with only 7 total touchdowns. Receptions, he falls in second on this list of 28 catches, which is certainly higher than you would have expected with him coming out of college. But what I was mentioning earlier is that next column right there, attempts per broken tackle. AJ Dillon has to run the ball 31 times to get himself a broken tackle, or at least that was the case last year. David Montgomery, on the other hand, when he was running for the Bears, only had to run the ball 10 times for broken tackle. Yards after contact, you would expect that a man who has 2 nicknames for his 2 quads is going to rank quite high on this list, right? Well, he winds up being tied with Miles Sanders and Jamal Williams, and behind, again, that of David Montgomery for yards after contact. I also mentioned the breakaway speed for AJ Dillon, and here he actually ranks out a little bit better in some ways that you'd expect, in runs of yards of 10 plus. Now keep in mind, the other guys on this list have significantly more carries than Dillon, because Dillon has 186, Montgomery 201, but then you see like Miles Sanders at 259 carries, Jamal Williams 262. That's 80 more carries for Jamal Williams than Dillon had. So keep in mind that these cumulative numbers don't necessarily serve as necessarily the best metric, but still, nonetheless, his runs of 10 yards or more, 15 for Dillon, 17 Montgomery, 34 Sanders, 22 Williams. Runs of 20 yards or more. Miles Sanders had 9, Dillon with 3, Williams 4, Montgomery with 2. So I think that those players are all very fair statistical comps to AJ Dillon. Maybe you could make the argument that AJ Dillon has a higher ceiling. He's never been the featured back. Jamal Williams certainly was the featured back in Detroit last year with DeAndre Swift having various injury concerns amongst other problems. Sanders was the lead back in Philly, one of the best running attacks in the league. David Montgomery, yeah, he's got Khalil Herbert in Chicago, or at least he did, but he was still the lead back. You can't say the same for AJ Dillon. So maybe Dillon's ceiling you could justify being a little higher because it's a little bit of an unknown quantity. Nonetheless, in terms of contractual parameters here, Miles Sanders just signed this offseason for a 4-year, $25 million contract with 13 of it guaranteed with Carolina. David Montgomery signed for 3 and 18 with 11 guaranteed in Detroit, replacing Jamal Williams, who signed down in New Orleans for 3 for 12 with 8.1 guaranteed. We do know that the Green Bay Packers, when they do contract extensions coming off of their first contract, generally like it to be a 4-year contract. This has been demonstrated by Elton Jenkins, Kenny Clark, Jay Alexander. Just seems to be how the Packers roll. The other thing that we can say is generally in terms of guaranteed money, the Packers like that to sit somewhere between 35 to 45% of the total contract, which actually falls under the NFL's average, let's say, of what these top-tier players generally get in terms of guarantees. Russ Ball seems to do a very good job making sure that the Packers don't go overboard with their guarantees. So knowing that Sanders got 4 for 25 with 13, Montgomery 3 for 18 with 11, what am I thinking for AJ Dillon given the Packers' traditional parameters for contracts? I could very well see AJ Dillon signing an extension with the Packers somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 years for $26 million with, I do think, they're going to try to go low on that guaranteed number, perhaps even lower than they normally do for that of a running back, something like 8 to 9 of it guaranteed. So 4 for 26, 8 to 9 guaranteed. That would put AJ Dillon at approximately 11th in the NFL in salary for a running back. And they save, depending on how they structure it, about $1 million on their cap right now. So maybe that's fair. Maybe you think it's too much. Maybe you think it's too little. But nonetheless, for his statistical comps per running backs on the market we're getting, I think that's about what his market value would be. Let's move on to the next player, that of Bane, Rashan Gary. Yeah, one of my favorite players on the team. What is the case for Rashan Gary? Here it is. I'm going to spell it out real easy for you. He's Rashan freaking Gary. That's it. I mean, he's quickly become one of the premier edge defenders in the entire NFL. He's up there in that tier, not quite necessarily cracking into like absolute superstardom, but statistically speaking, he's up there with Mad Max from Vegas, Max Crosby, Myles Garrett from Cleveland. He's actually in that tier. And I really, like, if you got to tier this, I'm going to put Rashan Gary and all those guys in like this kind of 1A tier, if you will. Because offensive coordinators certainly have to plan for where Rashan Gary is on every single snap, kind of like Max Crosby. But he doesn't necessarily invoke fear, especially in that of the fans, right? Because when you hear that you're going against San Francisco, you probably, one of the first thoughts in your head is, oh, we got to go against Nick Bosa. Or going against Dallas. You might think that with Micah Parsons or Steelers, TJ Watt. Like this instantaneous fear that creeps into your head, or the best one, maybe Aaron Donald from the Rams, right? These players that when you hear that you're going against those teams, one of the first thoughts in your head is, oh, crap. Like our center isn't going to match up good against that. Or he's going to get like his 4 or 5 good plays, but we can handle him beyond that, right? This recognition that no matter what you do, they're going to get theirs. And I'm not sure Rashan Gary is yet in that tier. Oh, buddy, but he getting close. And I have the numbers to back it up. Pair that with the fact that Rashan Gary is only 25 and a half years old. And this is absolutely the kind of player that you build a franchise cornerstone, a franchise contract around. So let's talk production, not reputation. And if you're already thinking like he's coming off of an ACL injury, the numbers aren't going to be like, yeah, I know. We're getting to that. This is the case for first. Let's go back to 2021, his last full healthy year. That year, 2021, he finished second in the NFL with pressures, 81 of them. 81 pressures, second in the NFL. He tied for 17th in the NFL with 10 sacks, 4th in the NFL with 15 hits, 2nd in the NFL with 56 hurries, and 3rd in the NFL in pass rush win rate at 20.7%. PFF also uses a metric called PRP, which by their own definition is a metric for sacks, hits, and hurries relative to pass rush attempts. They're kind of end-all, be-all, put a nice bow on it, how good of a pass rusher is this guy, by combining all possible things that they can do to influence a play. And at PRP, he, in 2021, had 10.4, behind only Trey Hendrickson of Cincinnati and TJ Watt of Pittsburgh. Now, let's take a look at 2022, right? Because we know that this was an injury-shortened year. Well, in only about 8 games, his PRP was second in the NFL, ahead of Bosa and Parsons. His win percentage was still in the top 10. And plus, depending on how they restructure or how they extend the contract, they could save up to about $7 million in cap room this year by doing the Rashan Gary extension now. So the case against Rashan Gary? Dude's coming off an ACL injury. Yeah, I know. And even the year before that, his truly elite year, he did manage to miss a game. When you're an edge defender and you miss a game, I don't think you're going to get the injury tag. But nonetheless, still a part of his history. And, I hear this one all the time. Even go back and forth with people on Twitter about it. Rashan Gary is overrated because he doesn't get sacks. You got all those other cute numbers about pressure and hits and hurries and all that crap. But where are the sacks, John? And in 2021, look, he finished second in this, fourth in this, third in this, yet tied for 17th in sacks. Going back all the way to his college days, it is a critique of Rashan Gary to say that he influences the play but can't necessarily finish it for a negative play. Now, by the Packers' own admission, sacks is not something, of course they care, they want them, but what they're really looking for is pressure, which happens to be where Rashan Gary excels. And the other knock on Rashan Gary is he hasn't had a singular season yet where he's also an elite run defender. Now again, going back to 2021, his missed tackle percentage was only that of 5.4%. Looking at 2022, he only played in 8 games. This could have corrected itself over time, but that missed tackle percent ballooned up to about 16%. And plus, his rush numbers, he's an adequate run defender. But guys like Max Crosby have had one elite season where they tested out as one of the best edge rush defenders in the league. I'm talking run, not pass rush. Trey Hendrickson has had it as well. Von Miller has had it as well. Certainly the Bosas have. Rashan has not. In 2021, he tested well, but not elite. So something to keep in mind. Plus, I guess I would say this is a knock too, although, these young guys, how can you really say it? You're really looking at 2 years of elite level production out of Rashan Gary. Of course, first year he was brought in, he was very obviously behind Z and Preston. Year 2, he began to play more. Year 3 was his breakout, and then year 4 was cut in half due to that ACL injury. So really you're looking at I guess you'd say a year and a half of truly elite level production. And are you going to give an elite level contract for that? The answer is, no, they're going to. They will. They will. Jair Alexander, coming off of his shoulder injury, still received a market reset style contract. Coming off of the shoulder injury, they're not afraid of these types of injuries, especially given the way that the Packers have been talking lately about how quickly his health is coming along. Rashan himself talking about it's not a matter of when, it's just we know he's coming back stronger, faster, better than he's ever been, because that's the way Rashan Gary is. So keep that in mind, too, that the Packers don't necessarily care that he's coming off of an injury. So let's look at some contract-based comps for players that are kind of in that tier of, they're real good, but they're not Aaron Donald good. Okay, let's take a look at Myles Garrett. In 2020, he was around the same age of Rashan Gary being right now. He signed a 5-year, $125 million contract. Of course, that's $25 million a year, with $100 million of it guaranteed. Let's take a look at Mad Max from Vegas. Perhaps statistically speaking, Max Crosby may be Rashan Gary's closest comp in the entire NFL. Last offseason, at the age of 25, which Gary is right now, he signed a 4-year, $94 million contract that's $23.5 per year, with $53 of which guaranteed. But let's knock it down a peg, right? Guys who haven't had quite the same level of statistical output. Harold Landry last offseason, at age 26, signed a 5-year, $87.5 million contract with the Tennessee Titans, an average of $17.5 a year, with $52 of which guaranteed. Bradley Chubb, who was traded this offseason, or traded during the season, I should say, to the Dolphins, then got a new contract. At the age of 26, he signed to that new contract. It was 5 years, $110 million for an average of 22, with 53 guaranteed. So I think you can make the argument already of Max Crosby might be underpaid The truly top of the market would be like TJ Watt at $28 million. And I don't think you can justify paying Rashan Gary quite that level yet because he doesn't have the resume of a TJ Watt yet. He's not sitting there with the Defensive Player of the Year trophy or anything like that. But he may very well be on his way like that of a Max Crosby. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I believe that Rashan Gary, a player who has always appeared to be mature beyond his years, a player who is becoming an increasingly vocal team leader. I think that this is a guy who also, by the way, if you didn't know this, Rashan Gary started his own agency. Yeah, like when you look up like who is Rashan Gary's agent, he runs his own agency. He's looking to do that forever. Like he wants to be a mogul, right? So I think he's going to be looking for guarantees, a little bit of safety, and not necessarily a contract at $30 million to reset the market over the top of TJ Watt. So let's say the Max Crosby-ish contract is fair. Now, the only concern here that I have before I say these numbers is it's entirely possible that Rashan Gary's team is going to look at that and say, well, yes, the Max Crosby contract is a fair consideration. But we also know that none of these guys really ever appear on the free agent market, because if you look at the top free agent edge signings over the last couple of years, they're not free agents. A lot of these guys re-sign. A lot of these guys sign extensions, or they get franchised because edge rushers, most of them, get franchised at the linebacker level, which is significantly cheaper than a lot of these contracts. So, bearing all of that in mind, I mean, Rashan Gary may say, all right, take the Max Crosby contract, add 20% to it, inflation, because, hey, teams are getting all this new NFL money. The cap is projected to go up $20 million next year, etc., etc. But still, for the purpose of this exercise, let's just say, I think a fair market value contract for Rashan Gary at this juncture right now, and I know some of you are going to completely just at this because he doesn't have the sack numbers, but look at the total picture. 4 years, $92 million coming in just under Max Crosby. That's $23 million per. Puts him in the top 5 of all edge rushers at the NFL. And give him 45 of it guaranteed. Now, that may not be as much as Rashan Gary wants. It may not be as much as Max Crosby got. But it is above what the Packers generally do at 35 to 45%. If you look back over their historical trends, when a player earns a third contract in Green Bay, David Bakhtiari, Aaron Rodgers, etc., it's very, very rare in Green Bay, but if you do, then they'll hand you the guarantees. For a lot of those contracts, like 60% plus. So, still being a second contract, I think the Green Bay Packers are going to try to get him in the neighborhood of 4 years, $92 million, 23 per, with 45 of which guaranteed. Maybe that'll come in under. Maybe it'll be just right. I think that's what the market looks like right now. Thanks so much for joining me on Lombardi Time Brews. I hope you're having an excellent weekend. I'll be back on Monday. Like I said, drop comments below about what it is that you want to hear about. Give me some ideas for this off season. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me. And as always, go Pack Go.